Hey folks, back at the piano. I had an idea. I had a really interesting idea occur to me today. I was thinking about what I was communicating with someone about potentially learning a little bit about social media marketing, social media practices in general, and I, for the purposes of business, and I found myself kind of realizing, I think, something about what this post is teaching me / has become / always was, and now it's becoming more conscious. But the idea that came to me is that something that is just an intuitive part of who I am, and a kind of a natural way of being for me is to treat my creative process like a spiritual practice. The phrase creative spirituality came to mind because it was like I realized, oh my God, what I've been saying the whole time, if I were listening to myself, what I've been saying is the creative process renders insights in the same way that spiritual traditions, spiritual practice within spiritual traditions renders insights and results and new perspectives, the evolution of consciousness, basically. So on one level, this sounds kind of trite because, of course, creativity is somehow inherently spiritual. But I think the distinction I'm making is that creativity in this context that I seem drawn to work within is not just inherently spiritual because we're all spiritual beings, but is actually a really effective and really inspiring, beautiful, enjoyable, and in the world practicable way of engaging with a spiritual practice. So a creative practice can, if it's consciously understood to be a spiritual practice, then it's like we can start to understand it from the perspective of our spiritual practice. We can get inside of our own mind in a way, get inside of our own intentions as we create, knowing that basically we're being guided, we're walking a spiritual path. We're walking a path of consciousness evolution. And that's kind of a cool thing to realize. Because it's not simply saying, oh yeah, of course my creative practice is spiritual. It evolves me. Yes, it does, and it will, whether we're conscious of it or not. But I found it really cool to say, oh wow, what if what I'm doing and advocating, and in some ways already teaching in my piano and coaching work, but also becoming more and more aware of wanting to communicate, is these two processes are one thing. They're not, this isn't like a fusion of like spiritual stuff and creative stuff. Although I'm grabbing from both, it's actually, this is one process. And if we understand that about the creative side, then we can really engage with it that way. It's like we realize creative work is the evolution of consciousness springing into the world, right? If the evolution of consciousness is like, if consciousness is something that really, the evolution of consciousness is kind of a misnomer, because consciousness doesn't evolve. Consciousness is the frame around everything in the world, everything we experience, everything manifest that exists is within consciousness, and consciousness is the frame around all of it. So consciousness isn't evolving. Only what's evolving is what's in the frame. So the evolution of consciousness is kind of a misnomer. But I think it's entirely arguable that actually what's really happening is consciousness is manifesting in new forms all the time, moment to moment to moment to moment. It's living into the manifest realm all the time in new ways, continuously in evolution, continuously bubbling up and fractal expansion throughout the cosmos, always growing, becoming something else, lifting, getting more complicated and more intricate even as it becomes more vast and more expansive. It's like the expanding universe. Imagine where our awareness of the universe has come from the beginning of time with, like, however far back you go, through various sort of ancient and archaic and pre-modern and perspectives on what the universe is, all the way up to today, the amount of vastness we know how to perceive instrumentally, intellectually, visually. All of our senses have reached out into the cosmos. Light years and light years, millions and billions of light years. That's the evolution of consciousness. Consciousness hasn't changed. The frame around the picture hasn't changed. What the Buddha said 2,000, 3,000, however many thousand years ago is still as applicable today as it always was. That has not changed. That's why a path like Buddhism, a very practice-oriented, practical, non-dogmatic, at least most versions of it, non-dogmatic, practice-based spiritual path can remain incredibly relevant all the way up to today. It's thousands of years old, but it's completely relevant to today. It can address the problems of today because those practices evoke archetypal stages of unfolding in the human psyche. And the Buddha was able to do that 2,000 years ago. He didn't need, he had that level of foresight. And I suspect many of the other mystics and sages also did. So that's the evolution of consciousness. It's not actually the evolution of consciousness. It's the evolution of manifestations of consciousness, which are always limited, which are always partial, which are always not quite the full picture, but which are always also the expression we have available to us right now. So to take all that in and realize that the path of creative work can be that scaffold of unfolding, that it can be that same archetypal journey through the phases of unfolding, to me is a remarkable thing to consciously observe. It goes way beyond simply understanding that creativity evolves us, or it takes the practice of that to a new level, and that means that now we can infuse the practice with a whole other level of reverence, a whole other level of scope and scale, a whole other level of meaning and importance in terms of what we're doing in the moment, what our practice is about, what principles are orienting our creative work. You know, creative work that is not rooted in this way might frame very different outcomes for what would constitute a successful creative expression, creative act. And I'm not trying to judge that. I'm just saying this is what's interesting to me in observing this connection, the fact that these things can be one thing, that they are one thing, and making them consciously one thing, allowing them to be one thing, and giving into them as one thing. So yeah, that's what we can do today. That's very exciting. It's very tied in with the work I'm doing right now. It feels like an affirmation of what I'm doing, and also like a rocket launch. Like, let's go, let's do this for real now. So yeah, thank you as always. I appreciate you so deeply. This conversation is central to my life right now. So much love, so much appreciation. Have a great day. I'll see you again soon.